All right, let's jump right into this. We're looking at a genuinely unprecedented convergence of crises hitting the Philippines right now, in early 2026. Think of this explainer as mapping out a perfect storm. We're going to break down the data, the exact timelines, and the primary sources to see how a bunch of seemingly isolated global and local events literally crash together all at once. So the big question hanging over everything today is simply this. How is the Philippines surviving what might be the ultimate stress test? Because we're not just looking at one isolated problem here. We're talking about a highly complex, tangled web of international conflict, serious economic anxiety, and fracturing domestic politics. It's basically a massive domino effect. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to trace the global oil shock as it triggers a national energy emergency and severe economic fallout. Then we'll pivot to the deepening political turmoil, zoom out to the rising pressures at sea, and finally see how the nation is navigating the storm. Part 1. The global oil shock. Okay, so back in late February 2026, the outbreak of the Iran war forced the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. That one geopolitical shock instantly wiped out 20% of the entire world's oil supply. And why does a Middle Eastern conflict hit the Philippines so incredibly hard? It all comes down to one absolutely crucial number, 98%. The Philippines imports 98% of its oil from the Middle East. There is pretty much zero domestic buffer for a disruption on this massive scale. And just look at how fast this escalated. The Strait of Hormuz closes in late February. For a few weeks, the pressure is just building in the background. By March 23rd, the palace is officially calling it a price disruption, but insisting they aren't in a crisis yet. But then, literally the very next day, President Bongbong Marcos signs an executive order declaring a full state of national energy emergency. I mean, things changed overnight. Which brings us to part 2, a national energy emergency. With the global tap basically shut off, national oil reserves absolutely tanked, dropping to an average of just 45 days. And this wasn't just some abstract macroeconomic stat, people felt this immediately. By late March, over 400 gas stations nationwide had to shut down just because they had zero fuel to deliver. You had the nation's biggest airlines, Cebu Pacific and Philippine Airlines, suspending routes to save jet fuel. Up in Baguio, tourism plummeted by 40 to 50%, which forced multiple provinces and cities to declare an official state of calamity. Imagine your daily commute suddenly costing double. It was a staggering hit for everyday consumers. Diesel shot way past 130 pesos a liter, and gasoline broke the 100 peso mark. The government really had to scramble here. They ended up authorizing the release of 20 billion pesos from the Malampaya Gas Fund to secure fuel, and private firms even started using U.S. waivers to buy hundreds of thousands of barrels of Russian oil, literally just to keep the lights on and the country moving. Part 3. Economic fallout and stagflation. Now, you have to remember, this oil shock didn't hit a booming economy. It hit one that already had some cracks showing. In the first quarter of 2025, GDP growth was sitting at a decent 5.4%. But by the end of that year, it had cooled down to 3%. And then bam, the oil crisis hits in early 2026, and first quarter growth just plummets to 2.8%. That is the absolute slowest pace the country has seen since the pandemic. This exact mix of nasty economic factors brings up a word that economists absolutely dread: stagflation. It's an economic cycle where you have slow growth, high unemployment, and high inflation all happening at exactly the same time. It's a nightmare to manage because the medicine for one symptom usually makes another one worse. Right now, there is a massive debate over whether the Philippines is officially in stagflation. So let's break down both sides of this debate. On one side, the government, specifically the DEP Dev Secretary, is firmly denying the country is in stagflation. They point out that there were clear, measurable economic improvements right before the external shock hit. But on the flip side, private analysts are sounding the alarm. They argue the country is already caught in a high-inflation, low-growth scenario. They're pointing straight to that punishing 7.2% inflation rate crashing head-on into the super weak 2.8% growth. It's a twin crisis squeeze on the consumer. Part 4. Deepening political turmoil. And right against this brutal backdrop of economic anxiety and fuel shortages, a massive political earthquake is happening domestically. Remember that weak GDP growth we just talked about? Well, a big chunk of that was actually a 2.8% drop in construction, driven by a major government crackdown and corruption probe into anomalous flood control projects. Meanwhile, over in the Senate, there was a sudden leadership shakeup, a coup that installed Alan Peter Cayetano as the new Senate president. Oh, and right in the middle of all this, Senator Bato de la Rosa, who was wanted by the ICC, took protective custody inside the Senate building. But the most extraordinary political development involves the vice president. The House of Representatives has actually impeached Vice President Sara Duterte for a second time. According to the direct reports, the impeachment centers on allegations she misused public funds, amassed unexplained wealth, and threatened the lives of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., his wife, and his cousin. These are obviously huge allegations, dramatically reshaping the political landscape. Now, to be completely fair and impartial here, we have to look at the response. The vice president and her camp have firmly and consistently denied all wrongdoing. Her defense counsel issued a very clear statement saying, "The burden now rests on the accusers to substantiate their claims in accordance with the Constitution, the law, and rules on evidence." So this absolutely sets the stage for what will be a highly anticipated and contentious trial in the Senate, one that's going to have massive implications for the 2028 presidential elections. Part 5. Pressures at sea. As if a national energy emergency, stagflation fears, and a historic impeachment trial weren't enough, external geopolitical pressures are piling on at the exact same time. Data from the Armed Forces of the Philippines showed that in just a single week, between May 4th and May 11th, 2026, 35 Chinese vessels were actively monitored roaming the West Philippine Sea. And to put that into perspective, we aren't talking about small fishing boats. This deployment included 15 People's Liberation Army Navy warships and 20 China Coast Guard boats. These ships were spotted actively patrolling across 4 key highly contested locations: Scarborough, Pagasa, Escoda, and Dayungan Shoals. Now, the Philippine military did note they didn't see any synchronized combat exercises happening, but still, a continuous, massive deployment like this across these specific areas is a clear signal of persistent, coercive maritime pressure. And the timing, it's absolutely critical. This external pressure is dialing up precisely when the nation is facing some of its most severe domestic vulnerabilities. Part 6. Navigating the perfect storm. So let's tie all these threads together. We've gone from a conflict in the Middle East, to empty gas stations, to an economic squeeze, to an uproar in the Senate, and out to warships in the West Philippine Sea. When you look at the whole picture, you realize these distinct sectors are all redlining at exactly the same time. The energy sector is in a declared national emergency. The economy is fighting off stagflation with a mere 2.8% GDP growth. The political arena is completely consumed by an impending vice presidential impeachment trial, and national security is stretched managing ongoing maritime incursions. These aren't just isolated bad news days. They have merged into a singular, high-stakes stress test. Which leaves us with a truly provocative question to wrap things up today. How will the Philippines balance its severe external vulnerabilities with its deepening internal divides? Resolving just one of these crises would be a monumental task for any government, but navigating all of them simultaneously, that's going to require incredible resilience and strategic maneuvering. It's a rapidly developing situation, and it's definitely going to shape the nation's future. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer. Keep asking the heart the questions, and I'll catch you next time.